All right. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Welcome back to the NASJE podcast. My name is Aaron Burdick. I am going to be your host for today's podcast, as well as my co-host, Amber Myers. And we have an exciting podcast for you here today. We have two great judicial educators that we all know by name. They're the Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, or any of your famous professional athletes that you can think of. They are William Brunson and Joseph Sawyer. Thank you both for joining us here today. We're so glad to have you on the podcast. You've been probably one of the most in-demand people that we've been trying to get together and have on. So we're really grateful and happy to have you here today.
Just so you know, I'm Michael Jordan of the two.
Yeah, so we're actually the Abbott and Costello of judicial branch education, and he's Lou Costello. He's the straight man.
Or Statler and Waldorf, and he's the old man. Although I'm the old man too. Then.
Yeah,
I love it. Everyone also only requested that you come together for this podcast because we needed to have this sort of banter for it to be worth listening to. So, feel free to keep it up. It's what the people want, right?
That's what the people want. Most of our fans are dead.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
No.
We make Joe Biden look young.
Yeah.
Very timely. After the last 2 weeks. Anyway, on a less political topic, maybe, we ask every person who comes on the podcast a very important question to start off. Get things warmed up. Are you a coffee or tea person? And we'll start first with William.
Definitely tea. I've never learned to like coffee. I see a lot of people who love it, and I guess I have a little envy for them, but I've never learned to like coffee, so I drink tea.
Yeah. And I also am a tea drinker, specifically iced tea. I drink a lot of iced tea, even in the wintertime. Iced tea, black, unsweetened.
Yeah, I have the privilege to work with both William and Joseph at the Illinois Judicial College, and I can say that they are very much tea people. After a long, hard day, let's get a glass of iced tea and we'll talk and just have a good conversation. So it's always fun to have those. So thank you both.
And Aaron, I think you've seen William and I at the lunch table literally fight over a pitcher of iced tea. So.
It is great to see, for sure. It's definitely always a fun time. Never a dull moment, that's for sure. So with that, we also like to ask our guests because we all know in judicial education, we need to have our R&R, our rest and relaxation. So do you prefer to go to a beach or to a mountain scenery? Joseph, why don't you go ahead and answer this question first?
Yeah, I think right now I would say a mountain scenery, someplace I could road cycle, and that also had a tennis court. I'm comfortable going to either one, but I think today I would take mountains.
And William, what about you?
Despite my wife's desires, I would choose mountains as well. She's a beach girl, and
Sure.
I like the mountains because I love to hike. So
Yeah.
I've been hiking a lot lately, and in fact, one of the favorite photos that I have recently is my stepdaughter and I in front of a big waterfall in Lassen Park, California.
Very nice. We always welcome.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we always welcome too that if you have a picture that you want to showcase in the podcast, we would gladly input that in. So if you want to send us that, we would post that now for those that are watching the podcast online.
Sure.
Yeah, and that was my next question. It led right into it. I think we just heard Williams, so we'll jump to Joseph. What is the favorite photo you have on your phone from the last month?
Right now, and I just sent it to Aaron, it is the fireworks going off at a Chicago White Sox game. So my buddy from Reno came up, as many of my friends from Reno have come to visit me in Chicago. And we went to a White Sox game, and it was on a Friday. And whenever they hit a home run, they do a lot of fireworks for every home run. So hopefully you'll get some of that. But then at the end, they did 10 minutes worth of fireworks to end the game. And that was quite a show. So very exciting.
And I also sent the photo. I didn't have the selfie because my stepdaughter took it, but I sent the photo of the waterfall. And you'll notice that in the photo, there's a lot of burned trees. So we were walking through this. It was kind of cool because you had the beautiful wildflowers that were brand new, and then some of the burned trees, and you see the new life, and then some of the life that has gone by. So it's pretty interesting.
That is
Very
cool.
exciting. So our next question that we have, that we always like to ask our guests, is something that you've either read or that you've seen on TV that anyone should check out that watches the podcast. Joseph, what is something that has caught your eye over the last week?
Entertainment-wise or intellectual, I think I'll defer to entertainment right now, but I've been watching House of the Dragon Season 2. William, I don't know if you were a Game of Thrones viewer. I think you were, but after the fact. So this is the prequel to that show, and it is it's the special effects of having dragons battle each other is quite something. So,
and I'm going to go more on the intellectual side, although I don't know if Joseph would agree with this because he has a very large egg head. But I'm reading the book called In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson, and it's about World War II. It's a nonfiction book about the ambassador Dodd who went over there and was working with the Nazis and his daughter and some of their relationships.
in fact, William, it's before the war, right? It's during the Nazi regime, but it's before the war begins, or at least
exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly. And so
he's a very fine author, yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because it's nonfiction, but it reads like a novel. So and I've read a few of his books, Eric Larson, and I highly recommend him for people who like kind of history, which I didn't like as a young person, and only later in life did I start to really enjoy history. But I like it kind of in a novel format as opposed to the very dry language that you sometimes see in history books.
Both very interesting. I think this Sunday was the first really big dragon fight,
Yes.
if I recall correctly.
3 of them fighting each other at one time. So that was a do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, people are starting to go down on the show. So it's getting more interesting. It feels more like Game of Thrones than it has the past few episodes.
Well, and of course, Amber, when Game of Thrones started, there were no dragons. There were none dragons survived, and I think you and I now can see why.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So that was our fun Sunday night as well. So stayed up to watch it.
Yeah, that's our weekly Sunday, 8 p.m. Central Time. That's when we get on. So
that's kind of the funniest thing we found talking to everybody is how much we all have in common, even though we're drastically separated. And it's like we've all found ourselves in this situation. We all watch the same shows. We all like to travel. We all like to do these things. It's like you're saying a history book that reads like a novel. Sounds great.
Right.
I'm going to have to look it up. That was my favorite topic to read about, actually, as a younger person when I was kind of a teenager. So excited to pick that up as well. One question we also ask everyone, I know y'all joked about being old men, but not nearly the case as some others. How long have y'all actually been working in judicial education? Y'all kind of give us the rundown. When did you start? What kind of roles have you had along the way?
Oh, my goodness. So I started on June 28th of 1982. I was a teenage boy, and it was before I started college. And so I started working at the National Judicial College in the copy room. And from there, we started working with educational technologies, and then just discovered that I had a knack for teaching. And then it just grew from there. But it's been a long time. So since many years. And since that time, William and I have literally traveled the world. We were in Saudi Arabia teaching in May together, but we've been to Uzbekistan and Russia, both taught in Russia, but individually. We weren't together for that trip, but in West Africa, Korea, all over the world. So it has been quite an adventure.
And I started in 1992. This is my 32nd year in judicial education. Joseph, he was talking about those educational technologies when he started. That was known as the overhead machine, very complicated light bulb. And
it's amazing how people found changing that light bulb challenging. But William, we actually did have a lot of lectures on tape, on videotape. And when I talk about videotape in 1982, it was black and white, reel to reel. So we're not talking about VHS tape. We're not talking about Betamax. We're talking about reel to reel. And then we actually had a Sony a 3/4 inch recorder, which they used in newsrooms, and those were about $4,000 back in the day. And so we had recorded to those devices too. So that thing weighed a ton, William, picking that up. So you needed to be a young man to pick up that machine.
And when I started at the college, Joseph and I were not close friends. We didn't become friends, and probably until about 6 years in. Joseph can describe what he thought of me at that point in time, but it was a little while before we became friends.
Well, William was, don't call me Bill William. He was very stuffy when he was a young man in his 20s, and he grew out of that. But he really was really rather stuffy because of, I don't know what he thought his role was. And I remember Judge Payant. Judge Payant was one of our presidents of the Judicial College in the 90s. And I remember him moving furniture and moving tables. I remember Bill Dressel, Judge Dressel, who was a judge for 22 years in Colorado and was the leader. And we saw so many people model that behavior, that it was a team and everyone needs to get involved. And so I think that wore William down, because he was like, no, I don't do that.
When I first got to the college, we had a little, I would say, a union of lawyers that they were saying, we don't move furniture. And so I was caught up into that. It wasn't my personality. I was more the team player, but we got this little union going on. So I didn't feel like I could buck the union at that point. But it changed over time, and soon.
Yeah, because Judge Payant had this expression, and William, you've heard this before, but it was, don't let that law degree keep you from grabbing that piece of furniture.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, and I never did thereafter. So.
Yeah.
No, it's really exciting to hear about kind of your background and what got you into judicial education, because I know that Joseph, during our different education workshops that we do here in Illinois, one of the biggest things that we always talk about is that no one grew up wanting to be in judicial education.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to hear individuals' backgrounds and how we all got to this great profession that we're in here today. But you both have been a part of NASJE probably since you both got in judicial education or shortly thereafter. So you are probably two of the best people to ask this question to. But over the years, what have been some of your favorite memories about the NASJE conference?
Well, I wanted to address that question of why I got into judicial education. It was really happenstance. I was a young lawyer, and I lost a job during it was a recession in the early 90s. That was the first Gulf War. And so I lost my job, and I needed a job, and I found a job at the National Judicial College, and that's how I got involved. It wasn't until I went to my first NASJE conference that I really kind of thought of this as a profession. Before then, I was just kind of waiting it out until I could find a law job that I wanted. And after that point of seeing, actually, it was Bland Teagle, who is one of the original. He wasn't a founder of NASJE, but he was very involved in teaching, and from Florida. And he taught a lot, and I watched him teach, and I was intrigued by that. And so that's why I stayed in the profession, because I really, and I also, because of Pat Murrell, who, with her leadership in judicial education, her education of all of us, and a lot of us early, like older NASJE members, we went through her institute and learned about adult education principles and practices, and that really charged us as well with all that interesting information. So that's why I stayed in the profession.
You're still young, William. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So,
Oh, I'll tell him otherwise.
Oh, yeah, he will.
I remember as a teenager working there for the first time, and that first summer there, and there's Chief Justice Warren Burger of the United States Supreme Court, and these various chief justices from the various states, and all these judges, hundreds of judges running around the Judicial College who were in courses that are up to 4 weeks long back at that time. And they were in class from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Then they went to dinner, and they came back to class from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. The classes at the NJC were extremely rigorous at that time, and they no longer are, and I don't think the bench officers today would tolerate that, but they certainly did at that point in time. I was hearing all of these amazing things. I was watching Chief Justice Bill Grimes of the Supreme Court of New Hampshire talk about the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. He was in charge of our 4.5-day course called Criminal Law. He was teaching in general jurisdiction, which was our baby judge course at that time. And all of these brilliant individuals were coming through there. And it was just absolutely fascinating to read the material, to go through the material, to listen and interact with these individuals. And I ended up meeting people like Justice O'Connor, Justice Kennedy. It was a whole host of attorney generals. There were, William French Smith and Ed Meese and Janet Reno. It was really exciting to be at the National Judicial College and to be in those courses and to be a part of that. And you found instantly, even at that young age, a profound sense of mission and what impact your role, whatever it may be, and continue to grow over the years, what your role and the impact your role will have on these judges going back to their states. And I also remember, William, and you may not, but in 1982, when we had a course called Non-Lawyer Judge, it was 2 weeks long, and the United States, it would have 100 people in it. There would be 100 judges at the National Judicial College who were not attorneys. Now, many states still have those. Nevada does, Utah, Texas, New York. The number of non-lawyer judges has gone down significantly, many because they've been eliminated in a variety of states. But that was actually a little shocking for me. And William, I don't know when you first showed up at the college, whether that experience was, wow, I didn't know that. But it was.
I used to talk to international visitors about the fact that we have non-lawyer judges, and they were always amazed by that and thought that was interesting that we utilize that resource.
But NJC was there as an educational resource for those judges who were not attorneys. And they really needed it. And speaking with them, these are citizens. They had other jobs quite often. They came from various walks of life, but they really did want to do the best job they could in their new role. And that was just very exciting and very inspirational.
Those are actually the judges I mostly work with in Texas. We have a few attorneys, but not that many in the level that I work with. And so I can say, too, I have had the same experience with that. And even as a lawyer practicing in those courts, was shocked coming in at just the percentages and how low the attorney percentage was. And then, frankly, when I started working with them, how much better I thought some of the non-attorneys were at their job. They just want to get it right. They try their best.
They want to do a good job. Yeah, they want to do the right thing.
And they seem much more open to learning and criticism sometimes. So it works out for us in Texas with a huge rural population, I think. So
I think
always
so.
advocating for them. So I guess back to, we kind of got off our question a little bit. We were initially going to talk about the favorite parts of the NASJE conference or some memories y'all have that really stick with you.
Yeah, I was going to talk about there's a diversity track at the NASJE conference, and I'm very proud of that. I think Michael Roosevelt and President Todd Brower are both very proud of that. It was not always the case. There were many years going back in 1999, 2000, where the Diversity, Access, and Fairness Committee really had to fight for a place at the table in NASJE, and many NASJE members today might be a little shocked by that, but that was actually the case. Kathleen Sikora, who was a judicial educator for the state of California, really did lead that effort to create that diversity track. And that's been very, very powerful. And I think it's made very significant change and brought wonderful types of education to NASJE members that they could then go back and share with their own judicial branch. The one that I remember the most, that I remember it very fondly, but I also remember it with a sense of trauma, was at the NASJE conference in 2008 in Philadelphia, when Judy Shepard presented and really worked with Kelly Tate and myself. And William, you may remember Judy Shepard is the mother of Matthew Shepard, who her son who was killed. So we watched the film The Laramie Project. Judy Shepard helped do the debrief, told the story of her son, and that was a profound and painful, but very worthwhile experience.
I would say my favorite part of NASJE meetings is really the networking, getting to see all of the people who do this work day in and day out and talking to them and figuring out what they do. We have networking meetings that we always have had. Also now I get together with the past presidents at many of the meetings, and that's always interesting and fun. Many of them have retired from judicial education, so we hear from them kind of about the other side of life after you leave the work. I also enjoy Joseph and Kelly Tate generally would do the movie and do an analysis of a movie, and I always enjoy that process of that experiential learning, or looking at it from the video, then talking about that video. And also almost always there's an experiential learning opportunity that I really enjoy. Not to say I don't enjoy the substance, but after you've been doing it so many years, you kind of have a good sense of the substance. I've taught many of the topics, and now I'm kind of looking for the things that are not on my normal reading list or normal watch list for movies. So that's always been fun for me.
No, I think you bring up a really good point with that, William, because you've both have been a part of NASJE for so long that I think those ELO opportunities, the experiential learning opportunities, are really the platform that you get the major takeaway from now in your roles. And I think that's something that for the newer members, that's a huge benefit to be a part of this, because there's a lot of conferences that don't have this opportunity. And so the fact that you're able to see the other side of the coin, like what William was saying, is really important to be able to take those ideas and what you learn from going through that experience and how you can take that back to your organization and develop courses and curriculum that are tied to hopefully provide something to that type of experience, or something that's maybe more relevant to your experience.
No, definitely. I mean, I think that's something I was thinking about just a few weeks ago. I was at a state bar conference, and just, when you get together with groups of people who do all kinds of different jobs, you usually kind of have these, okay, we're going to go in and do a legislative update, and I'm going to read off like this crazy list of case names, and everyone's going to furiously write them down and no one's going to get much. Or we had an AI class, I'm going to talk about all these programs, and there were a bunch of people in the audience that just looked terrified, like, I don't know what that is. Or the other half is, yeah, I use that every day. And so it made me think of NASJE, because I was working on some of the materials for the conference, and I was like, man, it's so nice to go and learn from people who their job is teaching, because we have the benefits are so much greater, and we have such better conferences. And oftentimes people aren't even, this isn't the biggest class they put together all year. This is, sort of an easy one for them to put together. It's, not a lot of work on the materials or anything like that, but it's just learning from educators is so different than just the normal professional conference you go to with, subject matter experts that know a lot of stuff, but they just don't have the practice getting in the details and different learning techniques. So it really made me excited to go to Tempe in a few weeks. Now somehow it's only a few weeks away.
Time flies.
That leads into our next question. Y'all both mentioned how long you've been teaching together. And I know now y'all are both working not at the Judicial College anymore, but you're still working together. In fact, we have you coming to Texas in a few weeks after the NASJE conference, I think the week after, to teach for us. And I know y'all been kind of doing that in Illinois and elsewhere. So tell us about how you developed that relationship and how that's worked through your career.
I'll start. So Joseph and I have been mainly teaching faculty development around the country and around the world. And generally, the relationships that we've established at NASJE have been quite wholly responsible for that, for the most part, except for the international ones. So getting to know the state judicial educators from around the country, recognizing what their needs are, working with them. In many cases, we've put together State Justice Institute grants, SGI grants, to fund our participation in those faculty development efforts. And so we've been able to teach all around the country. And then we also have cheerleaders who have said, hey, you got to bring them out, like Marty Sullivan, who was always a great cheerleader for us, and say, oh, you got to, he would tell people, you got to bring them out and train your faculty how to teach. And that's what we love to do. I mean, for me, I'll speak for myself. I find it so much fun just to work with faculty, taking a program where they've spent a lot of time developing the content, and then saying, hey, let's think about the best way to relay this content. And they have, say, 150 slides, and that that's not possible for the amount of time they have. So you say, how do we make this interactive, engaging, and fun for the participants? And once you've done it with a group and they see how it works, and they're just charged up with that. Mm-hmm. And so we love to do that. Better yet, though, is to train them on the front end before they've developed the course, so that they're utilizing all the techniques before they've even started. But either way, I find that just to be a great part of the job, is to work with those faculty and helping them to make sure that their audience are engaged and are having some fun.
I agree. And William, it's always amazing when you see a judge who really is a brilliant subject matter expert, but you see how their teaching has just so improved based on attending a faculty development workshop and really applying all of those techniques that you give them, that we give them, and that we're really kind of half of a foursome back in the day. William and I did a lot of faculty development with both Kelly Tate, who's another, of course, NASJE member and a former president, and Professor Jerry Hess. We had the pleasure to teach with them around the country, not just for states, but also for the U.S. Department of Justice. And William, you and I have done workshops for the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, for the National Association of Attorneys General, and many other organizations that may not even be in the judicial branch, but they are certainly concerned with continuing legal education. And that has been a great joy. Teaching with William has actually been a tremendous joy as well. And I think we know each other so well, and we can help each other improve the delivery of dopamine lollipops, so that I think when we team teach, I think people are more likely to remember the content because of the techniques that we've adopted in how we deliver the content. And if we can move it, faculty development, we can move any of our learning objectives into long-term memory and out of the hippocampus, then we have been successful.
Well, one of the things, we can't take credit for this, but the main thing that we do with them is have them get up and teach. On two occasions. And so you learn by doing, and these individuals, they get that foundation, that information that they need, but then we ask them to get up on their feet and teach. And they learn so much through that process, and we give them feedback as well as their colleagues. And from that process, they'll never forget that. And once they always bond, every class bonds, because they're all kind of nervous about that. I wouldn't say they're all nervous, but the vast majority are nervous about that. And we say excited. And so they're getting up there. They know they're in front of their peers. They're concerned about that. They do a great job. We give them positive reinforcement, and they'll remember that forever, and they'll utilize those techniques, we think, for many years after. We have been able to go back and see the fruits of our labor, where we, especially in Illinois, where we we were teaching there in the early 2010s, and now we've seen some of those faculty members teaching now, this many years later, and see that they're utilizing many of the techniques. So that's always rewarding to see that. And some days I like Joseph as well.
Yeah, some days. Absolutely. It depends on how tanked up he is. But yeah, it's Illinois is an amazing state to be working within the judicial branch. They are so dedicated and really are putting resources into judicial branch education, not just for judges, but for clerks, for guardian ad litems, for probation, for pretrial. There's so many other professionals within the judicial branch who are receiving that level of education, and it would be wonderful if every state could have that same level of dedication.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think you bring up a lot of very valid points. And I know that all of our judges and justice partners back in Illinois are really happy to hear that they're doing well. So thank you both for saying that. And I do think you bring up a really valid point with, just your experience that you've been able to do nationally with not only yourselves when you worked at the National Judicial College, but it was the networking opportunities that you gained through NASJE that helped even expedite that and grow that even to be something bigger than what it already was. So for our members who are maybe attending the conference for the first time and are seeing your years of experience and what you were able to do in the network capabilities and the connections that you made both professionally and personally with other members, what are some tips or tricks, or how could they set themselves up to be successful in building their NASJE network? William, or Joseph, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Yeah, the first thing I would recommend is when you get to a NASJE conference is to volunteer to serve, as the two of you are doing right now. You're going to serve on committees, whether it's education committees, the Diversity, Fairness, and Access Committee. There have been technology committees in the past. There's a whole host of committees that you can serve on. And NASJE is looking for those volunteers. You will make connections. Because of my service, I ended up team teaching webinars with Leon Barnhart, who's the judicial educator for North Dakota. I've team taught with Michael Roosevelt from California. I've team taught with Marty Sullivan of Arkansas. And it's just amazing that you get to know your colleagues in different states, and they become your friends, and they become your lifelong friends. And so volunteer, step up, work the room, meet them, be open to making those friendships and building those relationships. And I think you will learn so much. And of course, they will learn from you. But to judicial educators who show up at a NASJE conference and just sort of sit in the back of the room, you're not going to get as much out of it if you don't step up and volunteer.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a very valid, very beneficial tip. So thank you, Joseph. And I know one of the things that I always try to do when I go to a national conference through NASJE is try and have dinner with someone different every day, or lunch. Just get out there. I know for some, if you're more of an introvert, that's harder to do. But if you can just take a step outside of that comfort zone, you really can build a lot of great connections. I know when my wife and I went to Texas earlier this year, I actually reached out to Amber for different, restaurant tips, coffee places. My wife and I love coffee. So just getting that feedback on just small stuff like that, it really can open up your eyes to, what the true benefits are of being a member of NASJE. So thank you, Joseph. And William, what about you? Any feedback or tips on how they can build their NASJE network?
Well, I echo everything that Joseph said. This will be the first time ever that I've done that. Getting involved is so important. When both of us have been presidents in the past, and we recognize we're a voluntary association of educators, so we don't have paid staff. We rely on all our volunteers to do the work. And so when people step up and do that work, they get so much more out of it than they put in. It's so valuable to not only gain the substantive knowledge of whatever committee you're on, learning about the intricacies of that particular committee, but as he said, forming those relationships that in many cases will be lifelong friendships. that you'll have. I think that's so important. Also, I love your idea, Aaron, with sitting with new people each of the days, trying to find different tables to sit at, getting to know the new members, especially for more senior members like Joseph and I. We need to get to know those new members, get to know what their backgrounds are, because they're the next generation. They have so much to bring to us as far as new information that they've learned, bringing from the outside. That beginner's mind is so valuable to listen to some of their ideas about the way things should work. So I love that. I think that's a great part of it as well. So just being open to information, meeting new people, I think that's the way to succeed.
Well, and we would be remiss if we didn't also say people should go to the new professionals committee events early on, the first Saturday evening and then Sunday morning for coffee, especially since Aaron and I are both on that committee and planning it this year. It'll be lots of fun.
Isn't Elizabeth Morgan Beasley the chair of the new professionals? And so we think the world of her. So indeed.
Yes, she's actually our outgoing chair. And I took her spot this year. And so I'm rolling off, and I think Aaron might be the next in line after our friend Nick from Idaho. So, and Phil from Washington, we do a co-chair thing, which is really fun with that committee. And it's really all about just getting to know the new people who are coming in. And I feel like I really saw last year how great that worked out. We had great attendance at those events. Then we saw those folks walking around with new people all week. It's just being willing to sit at a table you don't know anybody at and say hi. It is one of the friendliest groups. And I feel like every year I make new friends that I reach out to. And just like we're talking about right now, Aaron and I have worked on several things together. And it's really a tremendous benefit for our offices. I have to say, we got together with some of the folks from Louisiana. They got to come to some of our conferences because we hold similar programs that we teach civil process to law enforcement, which most judicial education groups don't really do, but they do and we do it. So they came, and then we were able to share a bunch of online courses that took us, it took me 10 minutes, 20 minutes to change it because all the law was the same minus changing the word Louisiana for Texas. So I spent, half an hour on this module. It's ready to go. That saved my office a ton of time and effort. We swapped. Aaron from Louisiana did the same thing. It worked out really great for our folks. They got extra training and, no cost really to the taxpayers. So a lot of really good things come out of these conferences. So you're not going to get any small advocates here on this podcast. We're obviously all about NASJE. And then we always come to our last question, and folks would like to take it a different way every time. It can be professional advice, it can be personal, but one of the funnest things about doing these podcasts is listening to everyone's best advice they've ever been given. And so take that how you want. But William, we'll turn it over to you first.
Well, I've been using this a lot lately. It's kind of been a mantra for me, because there are so many things in this work that you can't control. You're kind of leading from the middle. A lot of times you're not at the top. You're certainly not the Chief Justice. You're not the director of your administrative office of the courts. So you're always leading from the middle. So you have to choose those things you can change. And so I use this serenity statement: grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I've been saying that to myself a lot lately. I should have been saying that earlier in my career, because I was always trying to change the things that I had no capacity to change, and you end up beating your head against the wall. And so that's not recommended. And then I have a favorite quote from Mark Twain that is apropos of nothing, but I just love this quote, so I thought I would share it. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. And so I think that is so great. We all have so much to learn in our professions, and in this profession especially. And I just think it's wonderful you have the group of new judicial educators where you're so supportive of them. That is a relatively new committee and a new process for onboarding those individuals. And I think it's just wonderful. And I know that they feel supported because I talk to many of the new members every time I go to NASJE and hear their delight at finding out that these new friendships have been formed and that they have a family of judicial educators that they can rely upon. So that's great.
Well, I'll give the 2 bits of advice, and I'm going to focus on teaching. So these are the 2 tips that have been very beneficial, and there have been many because both William and I are really products of Dr. Pat Murrell and the Judicial Leadership Institute and the Institute for Faculty Excellence. But the 2 tips for teaching that I've never forgotten and that I always have in the back of my mind, one is from the late Judge Tracy Page, who said, Joseph, if you're teaching for 50 minutes, if you're teaching for an hour, 90 minutes, always go into that classroom with too much information. And always have something in your back pocket in case the class speeds up and you need more teaching material to fill that time. And the second tip comes from Professor Jerry Hess, who gave me the inverse. He said, Joseph, always be ready to jettison something to go with the flow of the class in reaching your learning objectives. And so if the class is going a little slower, you might have to seamlessly, that's the key, dump some part of your presentation to go with the flow of the class. And I've always remembered those 2 tips. And whenever I stand up in front of an audience of learners, I am ready for both of those.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important to have the lower number of learning objectives, which are much more achievable. Pat Murrell talked about the teaching moment. This is a teaching moment. We can really gain from this. And so I think that is so important to, if there is something this teachable moment that you can share with the class, and you think it's more important than the learning objective you set out originally, then go with it and be flexible with that and let the learners know that there are resources for the other learning objective that you may not be able to achieve in that hour. But I think that's so important.
Yeah, and Dr. Murrell was always able to model that. And of course, there's another great educator, and she's living up in Montana right now, and she was a mentor to me as well, and also modeled that very effectively. And that, of course, was I just forgot her name.
Karen Thorson.
Karen Thorson, yes, indeed, the great judicial educator and NASJE president out of California. Yep.
Yeah, she was the main judicial educator in Arizona for many years, and then moved to California. And we learned a lot from her, and also Maureen Connor, Dr. Maureen Connor, who taught for many years and really did a lot of the research about how this has become a profession of individuals where we all say, when I was a little boy, I said, when I grow up, I want to be a judicial branch educator. No one has ever said that, right, in the history of humanity. And hopefully over time, maybe some people learn about this as a career and hear about their parents or grandparents who were served in those roles and say, I want to do that when I get older. So it's interesting, but I think learning from those people who go before you and taking that advice, I think, is so important. When you're young, a lot of times you think, they're too old, they don't get it, things have changed. But I think a lot of times you just have to listen closely, and there's some things you can learn.
I thank you both so much for joining us today on the podcast. I know that this is probably one of our longer podcasts that we had of recent, but I do know that our listeners are going to be at the edge of their chairs by the end of the podcast, just taking in everything that you're saying. So, Amber, do you have any final thoughts or closing words before we wrap up today's podcast?
I don't think I do. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time, and we'll see y'all in Tempe.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.